Inspiring Uganda.
Good evening and welcome to Behind the Headlines. My name is Timothy Nyangweso. Today we look at what Africa we want. The Comprehensive African Agriculture Development Program Summit that is brought to you by the African Union, the third one to be exact, that will be happening in Kampala beginning tomorrow. Can it deliver the Africa that we desire, especially looking at agriculture that they call the backbone of Uganda or the backbone of Africa? When we look at 60% of arable land in Africa globally, and we also look at 60 to 70% of the population there, 70% of that population is in subsistence farming, and 70% of that population is a young population. The biggest question, what can this comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program do to define Africa as the food basket of the world? Is that possible? Or is this a photo moment for ministers and heads of state to come together, take a photo, and nothing is implemented? In 20 years that it has been around, since 2003, what has it made as a difference? 10% of national budgets have been tried to be able to be put in such places. 6% increase of food production is the target. Has any of that been achieved? Or are there any milestones to talk about? There's a panel here, and it's going to be giving us its analysis of what is happening. Let me start on my immediate left. On my immediate left, I have Professor Sarah Sari, who is a director now at the Institute of Gender and Development Studies. Good evening, Professor.
Good evening, Timothy, and good evening, our viewers.
And today I got it right after you had told me the last show we were here together.
Yes, thank you.
Here for the first time, Professor Bernard Bashasha, who is part of the Agribusiness, Natural Resources Economy, College of Agricultural and Environmental Science at Makerere University. Good evening, Professor.
Good evening, Timothy. Good evening, viewers.
Happy New Year.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
And it's good to host you for the very first time.
I appreciate.
Thank you, too. Dr. Richard Edima, who is at the Department of Agriculture and Production at Makerere University.
And good evening. The director.
And the director.
Of Makerere Crop Improvement.
Uh-huh. I got the whole thing. It was like a sentence. Good to have you, Dr. Richard.
Thank you. Thank you. Good evening, Timothy. Good evening, viewers, and Happy New Year.
He's a farmer, veteran politician. He's a professor of insects. Professor Maurice Ogenga Latigo, anything pesticides. Happy New Year, and it is good to have you again.
Thank you very much, Timothy. Good evening, viewers, and I'm very pleased to be with this panel.
Yes.
Colleagues for very old times.
I hope at some point we can talk about that article because it caught my eye and the professor has just hinted on it. Maybe you can hint at a few things later on when we're in the discussion to tell us exactly what we're thinking.
Yes.
Lastly, but not least, the Honorable Minister of State for Agriculture, Honorable Fred Bwino. Good evening, sir, and it's good to host you for the first time.
Thank you very much, Timothy, and good evening to you and good evening to the viewers.
I think for the gentlemen, I saw Professor last week. Happy New Year, and I hope it's a fruitful 2025 for all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
So you can be part of the show. Join us on our X platform there. Go there, drop your comment. Let us know what you think about agriculture on the continent, but specifically we think about Uganda even as we discuss this. Since at the end of the day we'll have a Kampala declaration, what will that mean for you and I, especially since the biggest percentage of the population is there? And how do we get young people and women involved in this, but also how do we come from subsistence to transformative agriculture as a country? I'd like to recognize a few stories that really have taken precedent in the last few days. One is one of Professor's friends becoming the ED, sworn in today, and Professor must be very happy that finally Hajat Sharifa has become the Executive Director there, and they take office today. The other one is what happened yesterday at the court-martial with Colonel Dr. Kizza Besigye's case, and also Haji Obed Kamlegia there. Also Counsel Aaron Kizza, who was once here, being arrested there. The other one is the Masisi town that has been taken over by the M23, and finally the fires that have been happening around the country, one most recent in Kapchora. And finally, if you need a digital number plate, do something about it now. But that's not the discussion today. Today we look at the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program Summit that begins tomorrow all the way to the 11th of January. The first session will be the technicals that will come in to speak. The next day we'll have the ministers, both of agriculture and foreign affairs, coming to put it together. The heads of state will come on the final day, that's the 11th, to really put signature to it, if this can be implemented between 2026 and 2035, 10 years strategy that goes on there. But we look back at the Maputo and the Malabo, and we ask ourselves, these two declarations, what has been done, what has government in Uganda done, and how can Africa benefit from it? You can also text us, WhatsApp us on the number 0709 60 25 92. That's for text and WhatsApp. Let us know what your thoughts are there. Let's get the conversation started. Honorable Minister, it's only befitting that I come to you first, because you, as government, assumed the chairmanship of this in 2014, and as your ministry, you took over. This has been around since 2003. What has your performance been? What have you done? In terms of looking at the two areas, 10% of the national budget, 6% increase, hunger and nutrition, what have you done as government?
Well, before I talk about what we have done as government, allow me to inform viewers that there is an independent mechanism for assessing how countries and regions and the continent are performing in as far as CAADP is concerned. And having said that, I want to add that that mechanism, the AU Development Agency, has carried out monitoring and assessment based on a number of parameters. And this has been done twice. The assessment has been done twice, and through that review, I can say clearly that whereas Africa and whereas Uganda have made strides towards achieving the aspirations of CAADP, there are some challenges. I cannot say that we have performed 100%. But with respect to Uganda, I want to give a few results from that assessment for Uganda. Number one, Uganda was assessed to have achieved 100% in terms of process completion. And I'll explain what I mean by that at a later stage. And then number two, that we achieved 86.4% as the index of capacity to generate and use agriculture statistical data and information. And three, Uganda achieved 100% for inclusive institutional mechanisms for mutual accountability and peer review. And number four, Uganda achieved 47.3% of farm, pastoral, and fisher households' performance towards resilience against climate and weather-related shocks. And then the last one is about the various agricultural value chains. All the value chains assessed were performing well. And this rating from the independent review is on account of the following. Number one, implementation of several policy and investment projects, such as the Climate Smart project that has a number of interventions that are supposed to help the local farmer get more resilient against those other challenges. Then the project called U-Gift, particularly the micro-scale irrigation program that is implemented at the district level, where farmers are given an opportunity to get small-scale irrigation systems. And then the other, we had what we called the Agriculture Cluster Development Project, ACDP, that helped farmers improve productivity for specific enterprises like coffee, like maize, like cassava, and we also helped them with value addition equipment. Then another project called Resilient Pastoral Livelihood Project, and so many others. But on top of that, as government, we domesticated CAADP into our NDP. Particularly, we have been through the NDP, NDP3, NDP2 backwards. And then, finally, the implementation of the parish development model, which has encouraged private-private partnership, but particularly solving the issue of agricultural financing. So this is what we have done as government. However, on the flip side, Uganda was rated poorly on some parameters, and I'm not shy to point them out, because it's only that way that we can perform better next time. For example, in terms of public agriculture expenditure as a share of agriculture value added, we performed poorly here, only 3.1%. And in terms of increasing agricultural value added per agricultural worker, for so many workers, how much of their produce do we add value? Here, we performed 18.7%. And then, on the proportion of the 6 up to 23-month-old children who meet the minimum acceptable diet, here, again, we performed poorly, and we achieved 15%. And the second last, the prevalence of stunting among children under 5 years. Here, our performance was 26%. And finally, on the total agricultural spending as a share of agricultural GDP, here our achievement is really minimal, 0.3%. Overall, Uganda's rating is given as progressing well. It is foreseen that under CAADP 2635 and the Kampala CAADP declaration, Uganda will do even better, since the foundation for faster and more impactful implementation is already in place in terms of better infrastructure, better technology, more trained human resource, peace and stability, among others. It is important to bear in mind that a strong agriculture sector is a foundation for strong agri-food system, including agro-industrialization and food self-sufficiency. So this is how we are performing as Uganda and as government.
So when you do an aggregate performance of the goods and the challenges, how have you performed?
I would say we have performed fairly. I would say we have performed fairly, and there is room for improvement, and there is a political will to improve.
Let me come to Professor. Professor, you have been both, you have fit in both the arena of the politics, but also the arena of agriculture there. When you hear this performance and hear such a beautiful, I've read the Maputo, the Malabo declarations, beautiful. I've read what they're talking about, the blue economy. I've seen how it can transform Africa. But let's come back home. He talks about stunting, talks about the biggest one is 0.3, what we're spending as a government in agriculture that we call our backbone. What are your thoughts on this, especially with this summit coming up tomorrow?
Well, thank you very much, and I thank the Minister for giving very fair highlights of the country's performance in the context of CAADP. And secondly, I think the Minister was modest. Part of the big initiative that really excites me is the recent launch of the support to commercial farming, the 176 billion shillings, and the commitment of government that those who will borrow that fund, when they use it and pay back, government will pay interests. This is something that I'd been advocating for a very, very long time. From the times when I was in Uganda Vision 2025, I was the agricultural sector expert in that, and we formulated very clear framework for agricultural transformation. Now, coming back to the challenges, first of all, that Africa faces. Africa had two difficulties. One, political stability. Many of the countries that have been politically unstable have performed extremely poorly in terms of addressing the agricultural needs of their country. The other one is the structural adjustment program. And that is something that started when I was still in Makerere, when they dissolved extension services, the cooperatives all were dissolved. In fact, American government programs in Uganda, they did not even allow you to use the word cooperative in their reports. Now, that one absolutely undermined the foundation for progress in agricultural development. But I've always said this, our government, if they had put the kind of money that they put in other sectors, in agriculture, the outcome would have been tremendous. One, because of the potential that this country holds. The kind of climatic balance that we have in this country is not found in most countries in Africa. From temperate to even Karamoja, which people think it is dry, is still wetter than Zimbabwe, where the whites would collect water and irrigate and produce. So we had a huge potential. Secondly, we have potential for large-scale irrigation because we have the lakes and the rivers. And then thirdly, we have good soils. But to be able to do that, we needed, first of all, a framework which is very clear. Secondly, an instrument for implementation. I wrote some time ago in the papers, and I said, if I had the means, and I still urge, the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Education, the Ministry of Health, the Ministry of Works and Infrastructure, they ought to be like Ministry of Finance. All of them should be centralized, so that when a policy framework for agriculture is to be implemented, the extension person in the district is a staff of the ministry, directly accountable to the ministry. Now, we have problems. You send money to the districts, and it depends on how that district is managed. So the expected outcome of the money sent has not yielded. And that is the crisis that we face. And it is going to get worse if we don't act quickly. Because oil is a very deadly thing. And once oil money starts coming, everybody in Uganda will say we have arrived. And the youth, most of whom are now have literally abandoned agriculture, they will even abandon it more. And so we have to find a way of intervening. Otherwise, we'll have to end up with Kenyans doing the farming here. Why it's doing the farming here rather than us. And yet, investing in agriculture is what brought some of us from our villages to become even professors and senior politicians in the country. Because in the 60s, up to the coup of Idi Amin, if you look at the budget allocation, from 1962 to 71, 72, agriculture would take between 20 to 26% of the national budget. Now, agriculture hardly takes 3%. And if the statistics that the minister talked about is brought in, where while it contributes so much, so little of what it brings to this country goes back to agriculture. It is an imperative for national transformation, for national self-dignity, because otherwise we will start importing food from outside. And that would be terrible, because we don't have costs where we can land this food. So if you quarrel with Kenya and the cut of your transport, it is game up. and this, therefore, investing in agriculture without the CAADP framework must be a national priority. And I'm glad that I'm saying this when the Minister of Agriculture is here, and when my former colleagues in Makerere are here, because they do the science, and I can tell you that the science in terms of research that can change agriculture, I have no doubt about it. At Makerere, in Naro, whether it is Serere, whether it is Namulonge, whether it is Kawanda or Kituza, the research has been done. All we need to do is just have the spirit and focus on transforming our agriculture. And we would be such a proud country.
Professor, before I leave you to come to Dr. Richard, you talked about financing.
Yes.
Agriculture is not cheap. And you talked about, the financing that is there, the 170 billion. He also, the Honorable Minister talked about 0.3%. Mm-hmm. Financing is one of the biggest challenges, especially for large-holder farmers.
Yeah.
How do we solve this question, especially that now we have fragmentation of land, we have pockets of land grabbing and all these things. How do we deal with financing, especially with our land tenure system?
You know, my argument has always has been for a long time urging government, and I've shared this even with the President Museveni. I said, let us create an agricultural and rural development bank. And then the issue of land, in 2012, the President sent me with the now Minister for Agriculture, Frank Tumwebaze. He was then Minister for the Presidency, and Professor Nyira, to Malaysia. And Malaysia, after independence, they recognized that the shops and all these businesses were run by Indians and Chinese, etc. The indigenous Malays would have been a problem if they are not transformed. So Malaysia created what they call FELDA, Federal Land Development Authority. And that one transformed land use in Malaysia. They would acquire large chunks of land, create settlements with all the infrastructure, and made them grow rubber and palm oil. And I can tell you, by the time we went there, a Malaysian household under FELDA, the monthly income was like, was it $5,000? The Malays stopped working in agriculture. They were getting labor from Indonesia and other Southeast Asian countries. Their agricultural bank was the second IPO after, was it Facebook or what? Yes, and it was $2.something billion. And so it is possible. It is possible for us to create a situation that allows for that transformation to take place.
Thank you very much, Professor. Let me come to Dr. Richard. Dr. Richard, you have had the two reports.
Richard is actually Professor.
Yes. You've had the two reports given to us by the Minister. And quite a balanced report, I should say.
Yeah.
The challenges, the successes in the terms of statistics when we look at it. But when you look at areas like land and water management, rural infrastructure, roads, we have done well so far. The question is, how does this CAADP translate to what Professor Latigo has said, to the ground? Because we have excesses that are not being put anywhere. I go to Mbara and I find people pouring milk because he has got to the place and there's nowhere to put his milk. You get to a place, last week we were talking about people removing their coffee early because of the theft issues. How do we manage that of excesses?
Thank you very much. I also would like to join my colleagues in appreciating and thanking the government for hosting the CAADP meeting, Kampala 2025. I think that is really Africa Union's recognition of Ugandan agriculture and the milestones we've made over the years. And I really would like to recognize my senior colleagues, for the background they've given, and very balanced, and the challenges. I think that if you really go to our national plans of how we want to handle this issue of why we're not reaching down to the farmers, the plans are very good. The policies are well set. But the problem is that implementation has been a challenge of reaching there. We have talked about how to add value to our products in agriculture and taking it down to the smallholder farmers. But how many of them are getting these innovations and using them? We're talking of finance to these farmers to help them have storages so that milk is not spilled. If you do the statistics and the numbers of small-scale subsistent farmers, that makes 70% of Ugandan agriculture. There are challenges of how much penetration is going there. Professors already talked of the extension services that had challenges already, and that is still not reaching there. So there is a lot of description of what we can do there, and some of them are really very good. And I think that if we go to our National Development Plan for right now and really with the discipline and commitment, implement the series of recommendations. After learning all of the development plans since Development Plan 1, 2, 3, and now we're going to the 4th, all the CAADP policies and all of this, if we go there and implement all of those things, increasing access to credit, increasing access to value addition infrastructure, you know, we build this storage, even for grain. Some of the best developed value chains are actually of right now of dairy and sugar that have really developed very well. The rest still have challenges. The storages we put there, how many of the farmers are actually accessing and using them very well? And there are challenges to those things. The road infrastructure is growing, it's becoming well. We're supposed to reach markets, but there are still challenges of how farmers can access these markets. Why? Because of aggregation issues. 70% of your farmers are small-scale farmers. They cannot produce quantity and quality if they cannot find avenues of aggregating them and going. The issue of cooperatives that Professor has just talked about. It is also true, you know, we've been trying to help these farmers to aggregate and become in groups, you know. So numbers of cooperatives have increased in the last 5 years. Actually, if you look at them, I think they're now 18,000 or so. But where are those cooperatives? Most of them are SACCOs. They are cooperatives that are meant for borrowing money. They are not cooperatives that are helping these farmers with production, with value addition, with storage, with ensuring that they can access markets and keeping those markets. And that is how sometimes we actually, as a country, lose these markets. Because consistency of our products reaching the market in quantity and quality has also been a challenge. So I think as we start looking, the plan is very good. It is all, you know, described very well. I think it is what we need to now look at in the next few years is the commitment in doing these things. But let me also not stop there. Let me talk about also innovation, science and technology, which is very important because, you see, we're trying to create a very competitive agriculture system. If we're going to get commercial, then our products have to compete with those from outside too. Remember, it's an open market, you know. So will Uganda's coffee, will Uganda's hash avocado be better than the ones of Kenya or Ethiopia? How do we make sure that we do that? Issues of branding, you know. Is our, can we trace it, you know, and make sure that quality, traceability, fakeness in the market, all these are sorted out. Can we brand it so that it is quality that is always going there? So the use of science and technology is going to be key. There's been an attempt to invest in science and research and development infrastructure, like the one I had, the Makerere University Regional Center of Crop Improvement. Some of the best labs in biotechnology and seed quality analysis are actually there. We have actually been storing a lot of germplasm of indigenous storage varieties of seeds and keeping them safe for posterity just in case as a backup. And the science and technologies that actually go to the farmers. So the infrastructure is there, but sometimes manpower is also a problem. In the next few years, I don't know how many of us will be retired if we don't keep this human capital development constant and making sure that the flow of technologies constantly improving and making our goods cost-effective, competitive in these markets still remains there.
You mentioned technologies, but also the way we do our farming, for lack of a better word, is archaic. We're still on the hole. The president has talked about drip. You get a bottle, put it there. Promises by government on irrigation. When you talk, and I was reading about innovations in India, where someone has done AI and the water has been reduced by 50%, pesticides that Professor Latigo likes to talk about are direct to the plant and there's improvement of 56%. How do we come from where we are, rudimentary agriculture and methods, to what you're talking about, innovation and technology?
We really need to link these innovation platforms through our extension services. There's a delinkage, there's innovation. And some of them, the uptakes are very slow. Some of them actually, we even do the damage ourselves. We don't market them very well and deploy it to the farmers in more adaptable ways. So in the end, the uptake is very low. So I think that the linkage between our R&D centers and the farmers need to be closed. That gap is still wide.
How do we close it? Because you talk about it being wide, but I've been to Amur, and the place has 4 big farmers. Only 1 Ugandan there.
There is only 1 extension agent, I don't know how many farmers, you see. So we've worked on issues to do with artificial intelligence to try and do those that are AI effective and help farmers access these points. We need to go back and restructure extension services, whichever way it is, to really address this gap, numbers of people trained. We were looking at the numbers of people coming out of universities, TVETs, technicians, and all of these things. Right now, it is about 8,500. The numbers that we will need to do is 30,000, see? So we still need to train a lot more human beings there and help them, keep them fresh, refreshed with good and facilitate them to interact with the farmers much better.
Professor Bashasha, when you hear CAADP and you hear how good it is, 20 years it has been here, we expect the Kampala Declaration being there, and then you look at the reality on ground, where are we losing the translation?
Thank you, Timothy, and I also congratulate the country for being selected to host the CAADP 2025. That's a very important, I think, issue put across to me, Timothy. The Honorable Minister and I think the previous speakers have articulated quite a number of points very well. From my point of view, the agriculture sector has several responsibilities to achieve, and I want to call those outcomes, probably for lack of a better word. Food security is one, nutrition is the other, nutrition security, and I think the minister mentioned that we are not doing very well on at least child nutrition. There is the issue of income, both for the households and from exports, foreign exchange, and of course employment. So looking at it from that perspective, Timothy, I look back and I see at the primary production level, we still have lots of issues. I hope the minister and the previous speakers will agree with me that our productivity levels are still very low. The yield gaps for across all the commodities, that is the difference between what you achieve at the research station and what you achieve at the farmers level, is very huge, meaning there is a lot of space we are not covering. So once productivity is low, production is low, and value addition is another problem that I think we are going to talk about, then we have issues, because if you have to add value, you need adequate quantities. And then if adequate quantities are not there, then scale economies don't work with value addition, and therefore you can't do much. A number of issues have been articulated at production level. Dr. Dem has just talked about extension. I don't know, I would like to hear from the Honorable Minister, since we are privileged to have him on the panel. But I think our agriculture extension has issues. The numbers put aside, the facilitation, I understand, has been improved, but I think the job is not being done. And I would like to point out, I think, skills issues. These people leave us, they go there, they spend years, and the science changes, things change. I think there is some issue of retooling of extension. And again, personally, what I think is that the farmers themselves need to be trained or skilled, if I may put it that way. I remember at one time when we were starting the Department of Extension at Makerere, some people wanted to call it agricultural extension and education. And people said, no, it's agriculture extension education, and that creates a very big difference. I think Professor Atigo remembers that. So we have people who are born in the rural areas, maybe they go up to primary 5 or 6 or 7 and drop out. And we expect them to learn from their fathers the way they are doing peasant farming and then do better than their fathers. I don't think it will happen that way. I think there are some interventions we are going to have to need. So that's on the extension and skills development at that level. I also see issues with inputs. Inputs are not adequately available there. Those some that are available there, you've heard of the term fake inputs. I'm not the one who created that. So we have issues around there. So once you have people who are unskilled, you have the inputs that are not correct and are not applied the correct way. Agronomy is weak. People are not doing the agronomic practices the way they are supposed to do. If you are supposed to weed 3 times and you weed once, then the weeds will outcompete the crop and your yields will be low. So we have a number of issues, Timothy, at the production level that are letting us down in terms of pushing out productivity and production that we need to add value addition. We have very huge post-harvest losses. I understand for some commodities we lose 30 to 40%. So I could go on and on at the farm level, but probably I need to switch such that I don't spend too much time there. So there are things we still need to do better, things we've been doing. You talked about mechanization, the hand hoe. The hand hoe won't get us, I think, won't get our agriculture moving. So issues of mechanization, tractors maybe may not work, but they are walking tractors. I have seen them in Korea and other places. There are some places you could use ox cultivation, but all these things, again, need money, they need resources. And I think my colleagues, previous speakers, have already articulated very much the story on financing, especially Professor Latigo. So beyond what Professor Latigo talked about, the 176 billion, I don't know, I think the ACF is still running, the agricultural credit facility, but there are cheaper sources of credit that we are going to need. Because all the things I talked about, if you have to buy good inputs, put them there, do the right weedings, do the right agronomy, do everything, much of those things need money beyond the labor that the farmers provide themselves. So then when you turn around, there are things we've been doing before the climate changed and the environment changes. Now we have climate change and the pest pressure is high, droughts are here, floods are here. So again, then there are a few other things, Timothy, I think we need to do different. We are going to have to go into climate smart approaches, climate smart, and I'm happy the minister mentioned the climate smart agriculture transformation project, which is, I think, just being rolled out as we speak into, I think, 69 districts. I happen to know a bit also about the ACDP and the U-Gift from previous work with the ministry. These are good initiatives, but climate smart agriculture specifically is, I think, something we have to, it's a jewel, I think, in my own view, which we have to handle properly because it has all the elements that need to enable us to address the ravages of climate change. Water management, irrigation has already been talked about, but I think beyond the rivers and the lakes, we need to harvest the water and probably even get that is underground of sorts. Timothy, we need to look at the energy, maybe the energy transition, because part of value addition is energy. The skills could be there, the product could be there, but if the energy is not affordable, then we cannot competitively add value and be able to compete and export and compete. So there are issues around there. Solar, we've been looking at the UNPS, the Uganda National Panel Survey, and it does show that between 2010 and 2020, solar energy use actually picked up by about 40%. So there is some good potential there. And I think solar energy is now becoming stronger. It can operate some value addition machines and stuff like that. So I'm also a convert, Timothy, of cooperatives. I think Professor Atigo talked about them, Richard Idema talked about them. I do feel cooperatives is a good way to go. Even financing can be addressed. Why I think that very quickly is because I think once you have cooperatives, then you have access to inputs cheaply and quality because you bargain as a group, and you can even import as a group. So you get, and then you can also help each other in terms of production. So cooperatives stand a very good chance of actually strengthening production, the productivity programs I mentioned about. But at the same time, they also help you add value because through a cooperative, then together you aggregate the aggregation program that Richard talked about. And once you have the aggregate, then you can add value. Or even if you don't have to add value, then that aggregated quantity, where quality is also controlled, can attract buyers so that you increase the price and the quantity, and by that time you increase the revenue, and that's how I think we get money into pockets of farmers, and the rest of the things follow. I hold it at that. Thank you.
And we'll come back to something you've mentioned, especially on climate, and talk about hunger and things like that. Professor, let me come to you. Next week, you graduate over 10,000 young people to come and join the job market.
Yes.
Agriculture looks like one of the biggest things that can be able to absorb them. The other could be tourism. But also when we talk about this comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, very good English, sounds very good. These young people have no idea what's happening. Yeah. How do we bring young people on board? How do we bring women on board? Because if the statistics are anything to go by that you both gave us last week, the biggest population is women. And the biggest population in this country, 80% is under 35. How do we bring them on board?
Yes, thank you very much, Timothy, for those great questions about how to bring women and young people on board. First of all, we need to, as members have acknowledged, the CAADP, or the CAADP, is really about sustainability, rural development, all about increasing food supply and all those things which are of concern to our basic human existence. But what we also need to know is that the CAADP and its Agenda 2063 is not just independent. It is part and parcel of the entire African Union Agenda 2063, which has so many goals. And the goal 17 within that is really around gender equality. And within there, they talk about women, they talk about youth, they talk about how do we get these populations catered for in particular priority spheres of education, employment, and health. But they also talk about empowerment. And of course, they have the target of by 2063, the Africa we want, 50% should be women's positions in leadership and all these kinds of things. And like members have alluded to, the Agenda 2063 is not just about agriculture. There's the aspects of gender. It has more than 17 goals. There's energy, there is the common market area, common free trading area. So there are very many things there. So I think if looked at it all together, some of these issues will be addressed. But then what is that Agenda 2063 about? One is about Pan-Africanism and the African Renaissance. That is the vehicle from which we are getting all these kinds of things being addressed. And really the aim is to try and have Africa to be the flagship. It's really like the blueprint and the flagship for Africa being a continent, or to have its place in the continent as a unique thing, but like the continent of the future. So it is all about those kinds of things. But key among that is really carrying on the agenda of the old African Union, or the OAU. The OAU was largely around independence, But with the end of apartheid, the whole issue was now how do we re-engineer Africa to get its own blueprint on the world today, to get its place within the globalization. So the same Pan-African ideals, the same identity ideals of what it means to be African continue. And given that we are among, not the youngest population, but the continent with the youngest populations, the majority of whom are youth, okay, 60%, in some countries 67%, and women, it is important that we bring these younger people on board. And of course, you have said they are going to graduate. And the challenge has been that many of them graduate and they don't have jobs. And because they don't get jobs, they are disillusioned about what all these things mean. And because they are disillusioned, they disengage. The only time they engage and plug in is at political campaigns, largely because they're going to make money of that, not necessarily that they really care about the politics. Of course, a few of them will want to reshape the politics. Again, maybe we shouldn't forget that there are many vehicles globally, such as especially if you are to use examples of what happens in the US now, there are all these things about retooling, reskilling Africa's youth because they are the future of tomorrow. Mandela Washington scholarships, Rhodes Scholarship, Obama Foundation scholarships. All of these are trying to get the youth in Africa reawakened so as to be part and parcel or key actors in reform. The problem is that a lot of that reform seems to be regime change kind of structured. But apart from that, if we put that aside, we also need to ensure that these people actually get replugged into the development of the country. If you look at the actors who led this country to independence, or these countries, African countries to independence, they were younger people. They were in their 30s, some were in their 20s. When you talk about the Cabrals, the Rodneys, the whatever, these were very, very younger people. But why were they able to be plugged in and to be able to create the change that they did? They were really, they were grounded in the material conditions of their societies. They experienced colonialism. They saw what it did to their people. The issue they're talking about of agriculture, if people were young and they were participating in agriculture and they observed the exploitation of maybe the Asian economies, with the Asian actors within the cooperative movement, or they observed how they produced and how they were paid peanuts, these actually became the vehicles for independence. Actually, some people have argued that the death of the cooperative movement and World Bank's attack on the cooperative movement was not just because the economics of market-led economy were better, but it was because these cooperatives are key vehicles for political transformation, for both social, economic, cultural, and political transformation. Because it's them that bring the people together, apart from the circles where we collect money and share it at the end of the year. But cooperatives were able to discuss the issues that affected the people. What is the price? What is the weather like? What do we need? Where will the market go? We shall not sell to so and so. We shall do this. We didn't like this treatment. We'd like these inputs. And because they were all put together, it was very easy for them to see the nature of exploitation between the African and the white man, but also to see the exploitation of the intermediaries between there. Some of the key African thinkers, like Amilcar Cabral, was actually an agronomist, okay? He was an agronomist who went to Portugal, studied agronomy, came back and was deployed to bring on board these Africans to grow what Portugal wanted. And when he observed the exploitation of the African farmers in Guinea-Bissau, that actually made him change the kind of extension service he was providing to the farmers. He instead went to give them awareness of how they were being exploited. And then that became the vehicle for the campaign for independence for Guinea-Bissau, okay? So it's not that these things are very diverse. These things are very much part and parcel. And if you consider a country like Uganda, which is very agrarian in nature, it is the economy, or the backbone of the economy is agriculture, as we are told, although we are being now outcompeted by things like natural resources. If they pick up, I know agriculture will die because natural resources are perceived to be the low-hanging fruit and agriculture is seen as a long-term thing, which I really don't understand because the food basket, anyway, it guarantees our food and survival. But you can see wherever there is a semblance of natural resource extraction, people tend to forget the agriculture. You can just go to Namaingo here with the artisanal gold mining. There's just brown smoke everywhere. No one is digging, because when you sift soil a bit here, there, you're going to get some small gold nuggets. You take them to Busia within a period, within hours, and actually you have your money. And when people make 35 million a day or 40 million a day, they're not going to do anything for the next 2-3 maybe months until that money is exhausted. Then they come back and do some panning and do. So we are going back to the Sierra Leone and Liberia problem, because you can easily get the diamonds and live comfortable for 1-2 months. When they get exhausted, you go back to the mines. What does that mean? Agriculture dies. And agriculture is special in that it has a way it creates human relations and social relations around agriculture. Through agriculture, you understand things like demarcation of land, and therefore the need for you to live in harmonious coexistence with a neighbor. Right now, because might is right and people can grab, people really don't need, people are very individualistic. But in rural communities where agriculture was the backbone, that was not the case. People understood law and order, people understood communal relations, people understood sharing through the vehicle of agriculture. So why are we having a crisis with the younger people today? Of course, because of structural adjustment, the death of, or the neglect of the agriculture sector, because when they talk about extension, it is privatized extension services, which means if you're a rich farmer, of course you have the 1 or 2 put at the district or at the sub-county. But if you're a rich farmer, you can afford to hire your own extension workers. What they forget is that agriculture has so many externalities. If your banana garden is doing so well because you got access to, you paid for extension, when the banana wilt comes, it will not spare you because you're in the same ecosystem. If many people now are into keeping animals, so you can afford to hire a private vet if you have the means. But when you are away, the villagers will collude with your herdsmen, even if you think your animals are enclosed, to try to get a good breed from your bucks or whatever, the male goats or the oxen, I mean the bulls that are there, so that they also get, and in the process, diseases are transmitted even when the humans are denying that there was any cross movement of things. So that becomes a problem. So now to go back to the issue of the younger people, the issue with the neoliberalism is that it killed the agriculture sector, but also killed the whole aspect of employment. It privatized very many things through market-led agriculture, development, but also made the government fairly abdicate on its role of ensuring and guaranteeing jobs for the people. So at the end of the day, when we talk about the thing, and of course also changed our morals with regard to how hard do you work, how ready are you, how resilient are you, how ready are you ready to be patient. And instead of addressing that, we are all skirting around cooperatives, or we need cooperatives, and the whole issue is the foundation is wrong. And because the foundation is wrong, and no one is ready to address that, we are now all preaching mindset change. And mindset change would work if we tackled it with ideological transformation. Okay. But no one wants to go to ideological transformation because the donors may not necessarily tolerate it. So we are supposed to just tell people it's good not to do this, it's not good to be that. But anyway, in Makerere and in the new institute that I'm supposed to lead, we have taken on the challenge by the head of state of how do we ensure everyone does political economy things so that we understand so that younger people are taught how interests and negative interests can undermine very good interests, how we can subject individual interests to the national good. And this is still work in progress. I know many papers in Makerere and many courses do tackle the issue of political economy analysis, but we need to be able to understand this from the global to the local so that younger people understand how their situation in these countries bears on the wider globe and know that they're actually disadvantaged, and how their benefit will come from they ensuring that the countries develop, so that they don't just say, for us, this continent we've given up, we're going to cross the Mediterranean. You'll cross the Mediterranean and go into worse servitude and racism. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me read some feedback that has come through. Good evening, Timothy. Thank you for the show. My question is about cocoa. What is the overview of the price of cocoa this year? Help us with the cocoa market. Good evening. Please ask the minister to comment about the cocoa market. The minister has had This is James from Manafa. Timothy, thank you. Let the minister transform from elitist approach to practical ideas and real situation approach to agriculture's improvement strategies designed by technocrats. As farmers, we are struggling, but the challenge is poor and personal benefit approach, attitude by the political wing. So Honorable Fred should walk the talk and not just talk the talk. Okay? Someone sends a message all the way. This is Matthias from Rukunjiri. One of the problems is that we have is affecting agricultural production in Uganda has been our education curriculum, which has been focused on theory of knowledge rather than its real application. I scored a distinction in agriculture at O level, yet I do not have a skill of milking a cow at this time. Surprisingly, one of the questions I attempted was about milking a cow. Our country needs to put more funding in implementation and recently rolled out competence-based curriculum so that our education sector ceases to produce knowledge robots. Let's aim at holistic transformation. Okay? Thank you, Timothy. And behind the headlines, this is Paul from Kachiri. Where agriculture is done broadly in large scale, I thank you for the great guests, for the show and the panel that is authentic with the ideas that they're driving this economy. We face a challenge of financing because the land tenure system, the government should do something about it. PDM, the cash there, which is good for the program, but not everyone has accessed it. Okay? Lastly, let's talk about NADS as an organization. We do not know why it was removed yet. Okay? Finally, Timothy, thank you for bringing such brilliant minds and intellectuals. Agriculture is the backbone of Uganda. What we need as a country is a budget allocated and should be increased in order to boost agriculture. However, all the panelists are qualified as presidential advisors. Thank you. I am Oluka Silva from Kumi District, and that's my submission. Okay? You're all presidential advisors. You have been appointed. Let's take a quick break before we appoint other people, and appoint you to take a break, and we'll be back after this. Now, the guy wants
Here's your chance to win school fees for your child for a whole year. Just pay school fees using Momo. Dial *165 *80#. Select option 2 for school pay. Select option 1 to pay school fees. Enter the student number and amount and approve the transaction. You will now enter the draw to win school fees.
The parish development model launched in 2022 by President Yoweri Museveni to fight poverty and enhance service delivery at the parish level has disbursed over 1 trillion Uganda shillings to more than 10,500 circles, benefiting over 1 million individuals countrywide. The government of Uganda appreciates you for embracing PDM and using it to move away from Okorera Ekida Kyonka. You are encouraged to continue participating in this journey towards socio-economic transformation.
Welcome back from that quick commercial break here on Behind the Headlines. My name is Timothy Nyangweso. Even offset, the conversation continues. I'm joined by Professor Sarah Sally, Professor Bernard. I'm also joined by Dr. Richard, Professor Laltigo, and the Honorable Minister, Honorable Fred Bwino. We're discussing the comprehensive African Agricultural Development Program. That summit is happening tomorrow up to the 11th, and we're discussing everything strategies, and at the end of it all we'll have a Kampala declaration which will be giving us a strategy for the next 10 years, especially for our agriculture as a country. Can Africa become the food basket of the world? But especially looking back home in Uganda, if we have 60 to 70% of the people involved in agriculture, what does that mean for us? And with graduations next week, where will those young people be? But let me read some feedback, then come back to Professor Sarah. Please address the issue of the land tenure system. Our land in Uganda is so much fragmented. How can one do serious farming? Okay, thank you very much. Good evening, Timothy. This is quite lengthy. Thank you for the wonderful team. Briefly, Uganda's perennial problem is failure to put practice to what they preach. For instance, as signatories to the Comprehensive Africa Agriculture Development Program, why have we consistently underfunded agriculture, not committed to the 10%? Secondly, as someone who has grown up in the UDC, was active and useful, it was active and useful. It created communities and participants who own their own production units, like the tea industry in Kanungu. Today, instead of giving individual peasants 1 million, why don't you amalgamate that fund and set up a production unit at each parish, hence creating jobs for the local people? This is Benjamin in Kampala. Okay, thank you, Benjamin in Kampala. Good evening, Timothy. Thank you for the program. But who needs opportunities and who can cater for them? The program is for corporate people. Thank you. I am Stephen from Chazanga. Okay, it also caters for you too. Thank you, Timothy. Such brilliant minds in our planning and development forums. Unfortunately, the politics has led in everything. Such brains are left out. This is Chakala Godfrey. Okay, let's leave it at that. Keep your messages coming. We'll read more of them towards the end of the hour. Professor, how do we benefit from, we have had Commonwealth. Last year we had NAM and G77.
Yes.
Very excited, the whole city is excited, buzzing with food and fruits and everything. How do we have holistic benefit from this in all sectors? But also too, we have high imports. For 2 weeks I have gone to, I can be exact, to Kalere Market, looking for tangerines. The gentleman has told me we're waiting for Kenya to give us tangerines. How do we have holistic benefit, but also how do we reduce our now high importation on agricultural produce?
Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe you went looking for tangerines. Maybe if you had asked for mangada, but anyway, jokes aside, I think we are, in attempting to become a global powerhouse as a continent, we are slowly relinquishing what we were, our niche within this whole system. I think over the time, globalization has caught up with us. And instead of us in Africa, and I think this has been the biggest predicament in Africa, when people write about the biggest legacy of colonialism and the loss we made, many times, of course, we talk about political leadership and we were able to reinstate African leaders. But Professor Gasheningo Mdolov talks about epistemicide, the death of African knowledge system, as what is going to be the lasting legacy of colonialism. In that we lost what we were as an identity. We lost how we produced, because there are people who lived in these places before we occupied them as a group of people. How did those people survive? How did those people produce what they produced? Professor Latigo talked about having been nurtured on agriculture. I know at that time people were not talking big, large-scale things, but every household was producing. Every household had a granary. Every household had local knowledge systems on how to produce, how to preserve, and how to nurture, so that there were no post-harvest losses, by the way, in those granaries which had cow dung and I don't know what. all that knowledge over time just gets lost. Because again, we are a community which for a long time didn't pay attention to history, so we didn't write, and we did not write. And when neoliberalism came, we were told to pursue disciplines which are really standard. You go for entrepreneurship, you go for the sciences, of course, those ones, the West really loves them. Then you go for many other things. So these other things which would have kept the people and helped to keep the people got lost. So at the end of the day, it is possible that actually there could be people who are younger than me who don't know that tangerine is mangada. And it could be possible that we don't have, I know Professor Edema is keeping some germplasm in his labs for the African crops or the orphaned, you call them orphaned crops? Orphan crops, those crops that no global agriculture industry is interested in. Why are they not interested in them? Because they are local to the continent. And because they are local to the continent, they're not consumed by everyone else except us. Now, we who would be investing in them do not really have much attention to them because we are all chasing the external dollar and because we are in export-led growth. So we are all growing what the white man wants. So we are growing roses. Then we grow, of course, now there's a big issue around soya and biofuels. We are all growing cotton and we are traveling all around the world to get that. Then we are into pepper and because the Chinese want them. So we tend to look outward and we are not looking at what do the Africans consume. Some years ago, I think 2008, I did a consultancy for African Development Bank. And one of the things we were being told in Rome was that actually the biggest market for Africa is on the continent. And that if we planned with the continent in mind, actually there would be large enough market to consume and save some of these losses. But you see, we don't look at that. We are all looking at who wants this thing abroad. And so, at the end of the day, we have lost that kind of knowledge systems of producing these kinds of things. So it is with that kind of loss, then you cannot avoid imports coming in and taking you out. Why? Because in those countries where the imports are coming from, they have spent a long time investing into the science, investing into the economics, investing into the politics of production, investing into creating a consumption culture, because also consumption is culturally sensitive. You don't just wake up and eat things you have never seen. So they have created a market, they have created a politics they have created an ecosystem. And when it thrives, then they produce an excess. When they have that excess, it comes. So even if you're in Uganda today and say you're going to grow your own tangerines, your own pears, your own apples, and indeed you can grow them because you have the best environment, but because you have not created that ecosystem to support that kind of production, your produce is going to be more expensive, but of course you're going to spend many more years trying to perfect the science of how to grow that crop very well. Maybe Dr. Dima will talk about since he's in crop improvement things. So you are going to spend much longer. But remember, the Kenyan who has done that from the 60s, 70s, is already reaping off the benefits of those years of investment in the science. So he is ready to produce that tangerine at a cheaper price. And for you here, you are just beginning. So there's no way you'll be sustainable, especially in a country where everything of this kind is privatized. So you'll be taken out. And that's why very soon you'll find many things, by the way, things like garlic. We used to grow a lot of garlic in Imbali, on Mount Elgon, whatever. But a lot of garlic is imported from China. So when you look in our markets, actually there's a lot of things which are imported. When you look at our supermarkets, there's a lot of things which are imported because the consumer is looking at their pocket. They don't earn much. So they are going to purchase where they get the best returns for their shilling, okay? But at the end of the day, holistically and over time, we are killing the production sector. So we need to look at these matters systematically and intentionally. And of course, political economy, we look at that. But within that, we have to look at the agriculture. We have to look at the production value chain and how do we make it cheaper. But largely, how does government invest in these things to make everyone productive? And just lastly, I know everyone will jump at, oh, land fragmentation is a problem. But if it is the practical challenge we have to work with, we cannot sit and fold our hands and wait for a time when there will be no land fragmentation because our population is increasing. We did the census now. The census showed that within 20 years, our population has more than doubled, okay? So we can no longer afford that, and it's still growing because there are benefits on improved health and everything, in vaccination and the like. So people are going to live longer and people are going to reproduce. So I think other than us just sitting and crying about the usual challenges we cry about, it is time for us, maybe colleagues in the sciences and us in universities, to rethink how to do these things. Because in other countries, people have planned and rethought. Malaysia has a bigger population than Uganda, with a very smaller land area. But they are able to do these things, okay? So what are the things we can explore? And I remember when the president came to install the vice chancellor in 2017, he challenged us because he had a critique on the economists who were talking about measuring poverty by surviving on $1 a day. And his question was, tell me about the economy of the Karamojong household, because they are surviving without $1. Tell me about the economy of the peasant household. Can we rethink those things and invite me here for a debate? Of course, we never did that. But the issue is, can we rethink with the practical challenges we have? I know in some villages like ours, where there's a lot of land fragmentation in Mbale, people are beginning what they call land cooperatives. Because the biggest fear on the horizon is land grabbing. So if you have a quarter and you have an acre and you have 5 and you have 20, but the government is saying and promoting a certain crop, can we get together so that we all know how much our acreage is in, but because we have come together, we reap off these benefits of these big projects, so that when government is being negotiated with, is negotiating with the people, is negotiating for a big tract of land. But so it's a land cooperative, and it's registered by UNBS. So there are different ways we can do these things. Of course, also remembering the other thing, that each time we go extensive agriculture, we remove the crop variety, because monocultures actually take out diversity. So it is interesting to know that Dr. Dima and his team are actually trying to preserve these things for posterity, because one day we shall wake up and we don't have the variety we have. We shall all be growing rice, because that's the biggest thing government is promoting now. We shall all be growing moringa and all these things, and we shall wonder, where did the African crops grow? So if you're concerned about the large number of imports even into the markets, we should be rethinking our agriculture systems, our crop diversity, our indigenous knowledge in these matters, and how we can support indigenous knowledge. Indigenous knowledge does not mean don't go to modern knowledge. You can modernize it. But besides that, there are many other issues. I mean, talk about teff, which is only eaten by Ethiopians. They have invested in it, and now they have a copyright. They fought the Dutch of this thing in the international court, and they won. But now teff is even being grown in the US under copyrights to Ethiopia. So even an indigenous crop, which is only eaten by a particular community, can gain global traction if you invest in the science and then you grow it very well. So then, of course, for small timers, you have the Grameen Bank as examples. So I don't think we should just plan and think big, the American style of doing things. There are also other examples that people have planned with and improved and worked with the challenges they have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me come to Professor Bashasha. Government wakes up and says, vanilla is the thing. We all go to vanilla. It wakes up, it names a crop. We all become excited about it, moringa. But the problem is, we look at the price and not the product.
Yes.
How do we transform Uganda, East Africa, from subsistence to this transformative agriculture that we're talking about?
The quest to transform from subsistence is a tough question, Timothy, but I'll try to see what I can say. Most subsistence farmers are subsistence not by choice, but just because of the situation they find themselves in. So for me, it comes back to the most of the issues we've been talking about since the beginning of this talk. These currently subsistence farmers, whom I understand are about 33% now, can be supported to interact more with the market, because that's how they transform from subsistence to commercial or semi-commercial, if you might put it that way. So, and the help could come from who have transited from the same way they wear out their current way. But I wish to add that I think we may need some deliberate policy interventions to support those farmers out of their current situations. Some kind of affirmative action. Because why we need affirmative action is to try to help people move from one situation to the other. But I do not think that we can sit back and say they will automatically transform from subsistence to commercial farmers on their own. Most of them are probably actually stuck where they are. And if you have a car which is stuck in mud, you either need somebody to push you, another vehicle to pull you, or otherwise you can continue driving there. And I understand the more you drive, the more the tires get deeper in the mud. So I think there is some help that might be needed there. Now, your other issue of these new value chains coming in and people jumping on them, again, I think it's a question of people just looking at what can be profitable in the short run rather than looking at the long run. And I don't know how we can change people's mindset to focus on the long run rather than the short run. But again, I think I see the role of policy there in terms of advising people, because if we have a frost somewhere, and in Madagascar, I think is the one which produces a lot of vanilla, and there's a problem there, and all of a sudden the world market for vanilla is up, and then we pick it up. And then when Madagascar recovers, then we are back to square one. Then those are swings, I think, which destabilize the incomes of the households, and at the same time also of course, the export earnings of the country.
Professor, just right there, when you have talked about the earnings, Brazil and Vietnam have had a shock on coffee.
Yes.
The price has gone up. The whole country, including our president, is excited about it. If they recover, how do we manage that we do not lose completely?
What we'll do now, Timothy, I think, from the policy perspective, I think to try to see how we could use some of the windfalls, the money that we are getting, to sort of build resilience. Because when we talk about resilience, and you said we'll be talking about it from the climate point of view, but there's also resilience from the market point of view, such that we are able to protect our farmers. I know maybe the Honorable Minister will be talking about some of these things, but in some countries they have buffers where you have some financing when the prices are good, and when the prices fall, then that reserve financing is used to support farmers to keep the prices at a certain level such that they don't abandon the commodity. But I know we don't have that. I think for that kind of arrangement now, I think retaining some of the resources or investing some of the resources in enhancing resilience, I think would be the option I would do. Think through at this point in time.
Okay. Let's talk about climate change, and then I'll come to Dr. Richard, because there are specific questions there. You look at Karamoja, last year we were talking about the hunger strike there, drought in some areas where flooding washes away all the food crop, and government has to intervene in such incidents. How do we become smart as a country about climate change and still manage our agriculture output?
Yes, Timothy. Climate change is here. Of course, I know there are some non-believers in it, but we can already see the shocks associated, and you've already pointed out one, which is flooding. Of course, one of the quickest interventions would be valley dams, and the climate smart and agricultural transformation project, I think, which the minister articulated at the beginning of the discussion, has quite a lot of that, such that rather than that water running and being destructive, then it is actually captured and retained somewhere and actually used for agriculture and livestock production. So that would be one way, but also stabilizing the the watersheds where the runoffs come from, because some of this flooding is really man-made. I think, I don't know, somebody or some big policymaker mentioned that when we had these landslides and those kinds of problems. So some of this water really comes down because the watersheds have been interfered with. The deforestation, the trees have been cut, the water catchment areas have been maybe cultivated in such that this water really has nowhere to go and it just runs. So it's again restoration of the watershed and catchment areas, the so-called nature-based systems of management where you try to work back water, the natural areas where before, restoring the natural systems such that the rain and the runoffs can be reduced, and then you reduce the flooding. So whatever flooding then comes out, then you trap it with valley dams and some other water retention structures. You could also do some terracing in some of these here areas, and I think that's how they used to manage water and runoff in places like Kampala and other areas, probably where Professor Sarasari comes from, and also in the mountain areas. So there are a number of soil and land management interventions, Timothy, that are common and are well known that can be introduced to farmers and convinced. Some of them are quite expensive to construct, so they may need a little bit of financial resources to support, such that at least will reduce that runoff. And there are also things you need to do on the drought side, because you mentioned floods, but we also have drought as a consequence of climate change. And again, that water then becomes necessary during the drought for irrigation and feeding livestock and even for human use, because in some areas even water for household use is a problem.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Dr. Richard, coming to you, specifically this comprehensive Africa Agricultural Development Program has the idea of the green wall along the northern African countries there, planting crops that really fit that climate change there. But yours will be a two-pronged question. One, the concern about GMOs to sneak into here. For you are in this area, but also two, is specialization an option? Because as Professor Bashasha said, vanilla becomes, then we all grow. What we're looking at is the end product and the money there. Could specialization help our country, especially looking forward? When we need Malakwang, we know that the northern area will provide the sim-sim in that area. If we need Matoke, the western area will provide that area. And Uganda has a way it's feeding itself before we even put the excesses out. So GMOs and specialization, is that an option for us going forward?
Yeah, thank you, Timothy. For the issue of specialization, the way we're building the agriculture right now is not, it's several pronged. Number one, we want to make sure that we're food secure, you know, and then we want to make sure that we're able to commercialize a bit and sell. We want to also make sure that we're doing all this sustainably without losing on the environment, you know, swamp areas, hilly areas, you know, how do you still do agriculture in these places and still get the yield, you know, high, and you still have bumper harvest enough to go out there. So there are definitely several models being put, you know. The president has advocated for a 4-acre, you know, some of it is for some high value crop, you know, that can be specialized for money making. And then you take care of your food. So really, if we don't diversify, the really big problem is going to be the issue of when disaster comes, really ending being, you know, diversity stabilizes things, and we still need to keep with that. So in the way to promote commercial agriculture, I know the thing has been to identify high priority crops, high value crops that we can promote in several reasons. Some of them are zonal, you know, in particularly in several different zones, you know, because of the climate and whatever, they are best grown in those areas. And so value chains are being advocated for a number of crops. I think one time when they went doing this, there were like 50 value chains. It became very big. That investment became very difficult. So we need to really keep prioritizing, and I guess it will be sort of chopping down from 50 to really a few well-managed value chains. And I know the dairy has gone in there. Sugar cane, I think, is there. There is the coffee one, which we're very used to. Hash. Now there is fish, that all going in there. I think for the country to drive its for money making, it's going to be focusing on a few value chains, high value, and promoting them, and really intensely financing it to go forward. But of course, down here, don't forget that, you know, the farmer still needs to feed, and he needs to take care of these things. But we also need to think about our traditional crops that need to come into play. During the time of COVID, when we are still struggling getting vaccines, one of the centers that government supported and opened in Mbarara University did some of those really great things. You know, we went to one of our tree barks, a tree, and extracted what we now know as Covidex, you know. And so when the Bazungus were still having problems, people were feeding on this. And I think, so there's still a lot of these indigenous things that we need to really harness.
Yes.
And there's a lot of value in them. So we have to invest into harness the potential of these things. Marakwang is a high value. Dodo, yeah. At some point we're just doing leaves. Right now in my program we're even trying to invest in conservation of dodo. Not for the leaves, it's now the grain. And the grain is a lot of potential, and even another cash crop. So there are a lot of indigenous things out there that I think we can promote, just like my colleague, Professor Sarah, has been saying, that there are things out that are African that we really could mine out and even come to the fore. It cannot always be rice and maize and wheat. You know, there's more down there. So GMOs, that's always a big debate for it. Should we or should we not? Well, let me start from the point of view that the agricultural systems that are going to survive in the future are the ones that will have to invest a lot in STI, because producing food and feeding people is becoming sophisticated. As sophisticated as even when human beings are thinking of going to Mars, which is 9 months away, they're thinking of using how these crops, any crop can grow in those harsh conditions. That is going to be application of science. So the agricultural systems that are going to be competitive in Africa, that are going to push and maybe meet market demands, you know, with preference changing all the time. Yeah. 1 minute you want your soy in a certain time. Another time you want it yellow, you know. Preferences are changing. The next generation also has its food preferences. The only way you are going to have this versatility is to really invest in the tools of science. And some of those are biotechnology tools. And some of the crops that we're going to really deal with that can really easily address some of the problems we can't even address using any other science are going to be GMO. You can't find, the way we approach it in genetics is that we go to the wild relatives or to other related crops and get these genes from there and cross. And sometimes some of these constraints just don't have any solution in our traditional genetic methods. Okay. So we have to go into this. So should Ugandans eat GMOs? They will have to make the decision. Should we're not just, it's not a question of just throwing it out there and eating, and you know, no. I think that these GMOs go through a lot of scrutiny. You know, they're probably some of the most tested things for efficacy and for
Safety.
More than anything else. You might even find. So I think this decision we'll have to make, but I think for the time being we can optimize the systems we have using good agricultural practices that can still get the yield to a certain level. But you see, each time you reach a certain point, the limitations come in the kind of factors of production that go in, and you need new tools. So we're not going to run away from using new tools because they make our food production more efficient to produce, more competitive, and turn around into changes is faster and quicker. That's how you survive and get your agriculture back.
Thank you very much. Let me read one message coming in from Professor Stephen Kanduho, watching from South Africa. He says, thank you for the show. The vital issue about agriculture, I do not hear the panelists really talking about more about the best practices, modern ways of agriculture. We need to seriously invest in AI, integration of agriculture. Agriculture worldwide is becoming high-tech profession. This will address the challenges that Professor Latigo is talking about regarding young people running away from agriculture. AI will automate the tasks, and the young people will be able to focus more and more interest in things like agriculture. Technology will teach the next generation farming about innovation and not just tradition. Professor, someone hinted on the politics. As a country, we are in a political cycle. All monies, as we speak now, potential aspirants are deep in whichever village they're in or constituency, trying to get people on their side. How do we find the balance between making sure agriculture is there, but also what Professor likes to refer to as the political economy is also working?
You know, if we took the example of the US, you have the US Department of Agriculture.
Yes.
You can shout your politics elsewhere. You can hardly influence the way that department, that institution is run, other than the technical competency to influence. And that's why I keep going back to, if we brought back agriculture to the center, shield agriculture from politics. Because once it went down there, the parish development model, you'll find 50% or more of it is politics. And then I told the president of that case where a mama waited in the bank for 2 days. The day she got the money, she had not eaten. She went and took the traditional wine, and that wine hit her. She fell on the way, and the young people just took all the money. But not only that, the biggest challenge we have is that our agriculture is not about the individual participating. I want to see agriculture touch my cousin at home. If he's not using his land properly, we must have an agricultural policy that will make him use it, including legislation. If we will say that for Acholi, where we don't grow coffee, if you have 10 acres, 1 acre must have perennial things, trees, fruit crops, 1 acre, mandatory, and you must plant it, or whatever percentage it works out, and you must be seen to have it. Now, if you make it a law, and you produce the seedlings will not rot or dry off somewhere. They will be planted. The second thing that I also, because they talked of land fragmentation, you know, if you make land use, because we ceded ownership of land to the farmers, but the government should have a law and a policy on land use that makes it mandatory. You know, a country like Denmark, if you have land and you're not a qualified farmer, you don't farm. You can rent out your land to a qualified farmer who will use your land effectively and benefit the country. Here, people will tell you, oh, I have my farm in the north there. You hear the quarrels about land. Then you go there, and you travel miles, the land is just sitting there. The young people are drinking, the old people are drinking. If you make it mandatory and say, let us come and see what you have done with your land. Otherwise, you have money somewhere, we are going to tax you. It will change a lot of things. And so, for us, we really have to be tough on ourselves. The Wazungus were tough on us. That is why coffee was called kiboko. You didn't do it right, you'd have a problem. The Mzungu knew that if you planted maize in Uganda, it would do very well and compete with the maize growers who were white farmers in the Kenya Islands. You know what they told us here? That you can't grow maize with cotton because the pest of cotton of maize will attack cotton. And people just focus on that. It was not true because the seasons were totally different. You have your cotton in the dry season when there's absolutely no maize. But the idea was to make sure you don't grow maize here, and the maize would come from Kenya to Uganda. So, in an equal measure, our government should be strategic. You know, we were discussing cooperatives today, and we talked about cotton. Cotton production has died. Do you know the reason? They removed, the president jumped on what Besigye had suggested, and I wrote an article and said, please, don't remove graduated tax. In the villages, in my places, people would grow cotton because when it comes to taxation in January, you'd be arrested for not paying graduated tax. But once they grew the cotton, they didn't grow only enough to pay graduated tax. They would have now enough cotton to buy clothing for Christmas, to buy things in the household. And then, because they have money, there was a big stimulus on the economy. And my two colleagues and the minister knows that cotton, as a way of pretending, it exudes the same chemical like sorghum. So striker would smell that chemical and think sorghum is around, so it germinates, only to come and find cotton. And traditionally, they used to tell us, oh, millet does very well after cotton. But it was because the cotton would kill the striker. But just one small political thing, removing graduated tax, you cannot recover. You put it back, I can guarantee you the cotton production will shoot up in a way that nobody believes. And so, as government, sometimes you don't have to take the straight line to achieve what you want. If you force people on housing, it will force them to do something, to make money and do the housing that you need. So, besides the money, unless we have a commitment and strategy, we will not transform. A governor in the mid-state in Nigeria, you know, when I first went to Nigeria in 1990, you go for breakfast, and the milk is a small sachet is from Europe.
Yes.
Now this governor is in mid-state decided that no, enough is enough. The government bought of land, restructured land, and when the white farmers were being chased from Zimbabwe, he took them and accommodated them. There, they became just 20, 30 white farmers on dairy. Even on cassava, a white farmer had like 20,000 hectares of cassava. What comes out of his system is gari, fully processed. And that commitment, if we make it with our own people, we don't need the white farmers.
Professor, lastly, before I come to the minister, national interests versus such summits. When you look at Kenya, it will refuse your milk, it will refuse your maize. Tanzania will dump its rice here. How do we find that balance, especially when we have excesses and protectionism of some countries, different economic policies and systems? How do we find that?
If the context of for East Africa is the East African community, you get caught. But it doesn't mean that you cannot get out of it. We are a very inefficient set of producers. We literally reap from where we don't sow. Because of the huge advantage that we have. This year I'm going to change from broadcasting my rice to using a planter. Because most of if you go to many of the farms, ordinary crop farms, the plant population there is like 30 to 40% of what the land should hold. So you've already lost about 70% of your potential output by just not practicing the right thing. And if we can change that and make people understand that it is not the size of your cobs, it is the how many bags of grain that you get, then they begin to understand, and then you bring in the element of supplementary fertilizer. Foliar fertilizers are far more efficient than the granular ones that you put. And in terms of cost, they are much cheaper. So, Mr. Minister, somebody also said something. Some of us here, if you ask how many of us have been consulted, in spite of all the knowledge that we have, you find hardly none.
Okay. Thank you, Professor Letigo. Lastly, the Honorable Minister. I know you have a lot to respond to, even what has been asked, but what are the expectations of the Kampala declarations and what will be its impact?
Yeah, thank you very much. Before I respond to issues raised by the viewers and my colleagues, let me inform the country that CAADP 3, running from 2026 to 2035,
yes,
has a focus on 6 areas. Number 1, intensifying food production, sustainable food production, agro-industrialization, and trade. So, food system, the entire food system, production,
up to all the way to
industrialization, trade. The number 2, boosting investment and financing, agricultural financing. And then 3, food and nutrition. Then number 4, inclusivity and equitable livelihood. And number 5, resilient agri-food system. And then finally, governance, agri-food system governance. So those are the focus areas. And I know that these are the practical problems that are facing us currently. Now, away from the expectations of CAADP 3, when I get back to the questions, the first caller or the first message was about cocoa. Somebody asked me to comment on cocoa,
price.
On the price. Yeah, there's been a challenge with the cocoa, but I think the main challenge has been that we have been depending on exporting the cocoa. We have not been doing value addition here. And the main intervention that government has done is to provide value addition here. So that instead of selling cocoa beans, we sell chocolate, for example. And as we talk, we have got an investor to do value addition, and we have provided land for this investor right in the Budivojo, and he has started work. So to me, the most important thing is to sustainably tackle the problem of fluctuations in prices and our farmers being cheated by the people that are exporting raw materials rather than final products. The caller who urged us to walk the talk rather than talking the talk, I want us to look back. Look back where we have gone, where Ugandans come from. I think the current government found when the entire production system had collapsed, totally collapsed. And unfortunately, at that time, we were having a distinction between food crops and cash crops. But even the cash crops were no longer being produced. The volumes were miserably low. So the first thing that this government did was to resuscitate that system, much as it was insufficient. Then, looking at, for example, coffee, which was part of the mix before this government came, the production volume was low at that time. As we talk now, the annual, as of June, Uganda exported 6.13 bags. 1 million bags. Each bag 60 kilograms. And the country fetched 1.14 billion
US dollars. So it's because of the interventions of government that that was possible. And this is similar to other enterprises. However, we have now diversified. We have diversified from the few cash crops. We had the coffee, we had the cotton at that time, and we had tea. Now,
almost every enterprise, every crop can be sold. Even food is a cash crop. So the various types of food can also be traded. What we are now advising the population as government, this response combines also what my colleagues, the professors, talked about. We are advising that since the majority of Ugandans have a land holding of less than 4 acres, let them concentrate on those enterprises that are profitable at small scale.
Okay.
So we can maybe come back and talk in details about this.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, there are several other concerns raised. I don't know whether I can respond or time.
I'll give you parting shots to be able to respond to that. But let me read some messages that have come through. Good evening. Thank you for the presentation and observations that are given to us about building a resilient agriculture good systems in Africa. The problem is low funding. To improve food security and marketing, we need to support agriculture departments to improve the production. And this, you didn't leave a name there. Thank you for your message. Good evening, Timothy. This is Simon from Fort Portal. My question to the Minister is strategies, putting them in place and bringing youth on board, agriculture university students on board so that they can also engage in such events, because I am only seeing political leaders on the list to attend the summit, yet the youth are equally important. Well said there. Emma, an economist, says, Makerere University, I think this is the right program that they should be made compulsory from kindergarten to PhD, because stomach, the stomach is the integrity of the brain. I request the slot to attend my Dream African event. Okay. This is Gabriel from Entebbe. Discussion is good. I think what I got from each one of you in the studio is I can be able to go and start my urban farming on a small scale as a youth. Very good. The last two, Timothy, thank you for the show. I'm James in Budo. I recently went to Naro and saw very brilliant minds, but aging. I propose the minister advises the president to change the focus of all these companies to take on youth in the country instead of becoming just trained in youth to love agriculture. Okay. Thank you, Timothy. African governments abandon the financing of agriculture sector to donors. Do they think they can advance CAADP aspirations based on foreign funding? Very good question. Enid Kiza there. Thank you, Timothy, for the input and the brilliant panel there. Finally, very lengthy from a gentleman in Rukunjiri. Briefly, Uganda's perennial problem. Okay, I read this one, 10% commitment. And good evening. I would like to request that the minister to give highlights on the processing of the product before it has been put into the market. Is there any plan to set up processing units across the country? I am Ronald. Okay. A lot of questions coming up on CAADP telling us about this. Kemgisha, thank you very much. I also see David from Nakaseke, thank you very much. Dennis from Rampara, quite a number of messages, and we want to say we're really grateful for them coming through. I'll give my panelists each 2 minutes to give their parting shots. I'll start with the professor. I'll get to Professor Bashasha, Dr. Richard, Professor Honorable Latigo, and finally the Honorable Minister.
Yes, thank you very much, Timothy, and thanks our viewers. It has been an interesting show. We are privileged to be hosting the CAADP.
Yes.
Because this shows that Uganda is a destination for very many conferences, especially for the last 2 years. We have proven that that is true and there's more to come. But like we have always said here, can we have documentation of what actually the benefit of that is in terms of sales, maybe in terms of how much agricultural produce? Our pineapples are very good, how much was consumed, how many people after those conferences went to the national parks, so that we know that the conference was not just about 2-3 days in Munyonyo, but there were real benefits, because then that will help us grow the other sectors, the hotels, the agriculture, the markets, the English, the everything else. I think that is one thing. The other thing, we have discussed a lot about the need to capitalize the agriculture sector because the peasants are going to be here with us. It is also true, especially research which was done with the white farmers in Zimbabwe before they were dismantled by the previous president, that for each time a younger person who has grown up on the farm gets exposed to 4 years of education, those people choose a career away from the farm. They were following, it was a longitudinal study following the white farmers. So that shows that just because people have grown up in an agrarian setting does not guarantee that they will stay there, especially if they are highly educated. So what this means is that we need to grow agriculture in such a way that we emphasize the spin-offs in terms of industry, in terms of creating jobs, in terms of all these things, because if agriculture, the backbone, does not flourish, then the other things will not take off. Because like you talked about importing tangerines, how about if we were producing them and we could create more jobs? But now because we are importing them, all you need is a truck and a truck driver and a person selling them. So we need to do that, and this calls for growing all the other sectors of the economy. And lastly, the Agenda 2063 is not just about agriculture. It's about other things which, if leveraged, will actually help CAADP take off. For example, if we are to have free movement across the continent and we can easily sell our things to DRC, to Sudan, to Kenya, to Cameroon, to wherever it's needed, then maybe production would also increase because there would be a ready market. Right now, we only look beyond the continent for the market. And then there is not much production because we are all competing. There are so many losses. And this goes back to what Professor Latigo said. I know he said we should take politics out of agriculture, but I think we need politics in agriculture, but the right kind of politics. We need to make agriculture a political priority, so that the good things he talked about, actually, all the recommendations he made, need a political window to be able to effect them. What the colonials did were political, it's because they had political power. That's why they could say, you must grow this, you shouldn't grow this. In Kampala, if you disbanded the terrace band, because they are the people who started the terracing. If you disbanded the terrace band, you were in for 5 years. When we started this cheap politics where you cannot enforce the maintenance of a terrace band and people are pulling down people's gardens, what do we have now? We have land degradation, we have bean wilt, we have, the land now in Chigezi can no longer support farming. So we need the right kind of politics, but we also need agriculture to become a political priority so that we all drive towards that if we think that that is the sector which shoulders all the other sectors in the country. Thank you very much.
And well said. I remember you gave me an example when you went, I think, was it Ghana or Nigeria, where you arrived and the material was given to you to make there.
Yeah.
Us here, NAM, the people were in the parking lot exhibiting. Professor Bashasha, your 2 minutes.
Thank you, Thimbotse. Yeah, I just have 3 quick ones as my parting comments, and most of them I think are for the minister's ear. One of them is on agricultural statistics. Proper planning really need good data and statistics. And from our standpoint, Honorable Minister, especially in the university, we don't think we have quality agricultural statistics. I think that's probably debatable. We can engage later, but that's an area I think we need to talk to you about. Secondly, Timothy, I don't want us to leave this room. We didn't have a lot of time to talk about our soils, but I wouldn't want us to leave this room thinking that we still have fertile soils anymore. I think the soils are getting exhausted and tired, and there's going to be a lot of replenishment necessary and management. I know there'll be a session on the soils, I think, at the conference one of the days. So that's another bottleneck to our enhanced productivity. So the genes, Edema is working on the genes, but we need somebody to work on the soils as well, because the two Edema's seeds, I think, are not growing in the air. They have to grow in the soil. Finally, Honorable Minister, I think, again, from the standpoint of the university, we think there is a gap between you policymakers and us analysts, the researchers who generate information which we think would improve the policymaking process. I would like us to think about how we can narrow that gap such that we can think more. The other countries I've been to, I mean, I studied in the US. And every Wednesday, my professor would have a call with the USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, discussing, consulting on many other things. And other places I've been to, I think ministries of agriculture value universities, but I think there is a little bit of weakness on our side here that I don't know whether you think we're in the Ministry of Education, but I close there, Timothy. Thank you.
Getting to Professor Dr. Edema, I hope he finds plants that we can grow in the air also. Over to you, Doctor.
I hope so. I'm working on that. I think for my parting source, I really hope that the youth will still stick with us in agriculture. With all the kind of numbers we have, it will be dangerous and risky to lose them and to keep the site. Some of our best brains should be in agriculture.
Yeah.
Because of the kind of sophistication. I know people run to medicine and engineering. Trust me, unless we put some of our best brains into the agricultural sciences and the STI and all those value chain analysis, it's going to be a problem to feed Africa. You know, the easiest way to disorganize a society is to remove their food. That is why sometimes some of the enemies use what is called weapons, biological weapons, and some of it can actually disorganize your agricultural systems. But leave alone the issue of food security and all that. But just to make sure that there's adequate food for a growing population. We're now how many?
45.9
45 in 50 years. That is another mouth to feed. Africa will probably be 2 billion in a few years. This means we really need to optimize our food systems and supply chains to feed Africa.
Thank you.
Depending outside is not going to be an option. So agriculture is a very beautiful area to specialize, and the youth who have been writing things and complaining and probably thinking we're more theoretical, I think they will find a lot of space and area to satisfy their aspirations in agriculture and really contribute to humanity.
Thank you very much. Lastly but not least, Professor.
Thank you very much. And I think there are two things that I want to talk about in my concluding remarks. I did point out this to the people who are leading the parish development model, because they were given smartphones like this, smartphones. If government can purchase weather programs, $10, if on a large scale, and you get it to all your staff. I used to be, on Sundays, I would go on radio at home and talk about the weather for the next 1 week. Initially, people just were skeptical. Then, after 1 week, I pulled away. And they said, Professor, that program was very useful. So even the skeptics were killed. A weather program like this, I depend on it. Mine here is you have the weather for Kalong. I don't need to be told where it is rain there. I see it from here. And I look at the projection for 1 month and advise on what to do, even when I'm not at home. That one is something that every staff at the district, government should buy. Because with climate change, the precision of what you do in relation to the weather becomes very crucial.
Yes.
The second thing is about youth. The best example of what we can do through our education system is the case of Dr. Naloima. She was one of the very first winners of the Uganda Best Farmers competition. She's now on the panel of judges. She has farm and school, Entebbe Road. The last time we went, after some years, we found from primary one, every child in Dr. Naloima's primary school is a project. You find two guys, they're keeping rabbits. They keep records of what they do, they feed the rabbits, and the money is theirs. And every pupil in our school has that kind of project. The best example of that was a young boy who went to his dad and said, "Dad, we need a farm." He pestered the father until out of that experience, they have a farm. Dr. Naloima's model is a model that we should really think about adapting. And the other interesting thing is, you have water from the showers. And they go to a tank, and they go to the banana plantation. And you go, we went when there was drought and people were suffering, you know, the drought of two years ago. And you go and see Dr. Naloima's bananas from water that would ordinarily just go to the
waste, to the sewage.
To the sewage. These are some of the small things that create a huge difference. But more importantly, I appreciate the frankness of the minister. Engage with the experts in the university closely, the experts in Naro closely, some of us who are farmers closely, so that we collectively can take advantage of this huge endowment that Uganda has in terms of agricultural potential.
Thank you. Lastly, the Honorable Minister.
Yeah, thank you. As parting shots, number one, I mobilize Ugandans out there to get interested in this continental meeting that is taking place in Uganda. They should follow up in various platforms, but also participate in the open side events. There are quite many, and they are open to the entire population. Secondly, I want to make a pledge that as government, we shall domesticate the outcomes of this CAADP meeting, so that we make the plan more practical, more realistic to the Ugandan situation. Number three, I want to assure the population, to assure Ugandans, that the Cabinet has included irrigation among the priority financing areas for the next medium term, MTEF. So this is in recognition of the fact that climate change is real. We need to address the erratic weather conditions. We need to enable farmers to produce off-season. We need to enable farmers to increase on their productivity. Number four, you talked about the fact that soil is no longer as fertile as it used to be, because we have kept on mining season after season. So government is discussing this challenge, and in the right time, we shall announce interventions to address this challenge. And then finally, on financing, the existing financing mechanisms have helped, but we want to expand them. For example, government is considering expanding on the PDM financing, because we have got feedback from the population. But we have also brought on board, as Professor Latigo pointed out, we have brought on board financing for large-scale farmers so that we can help those with large pieces of land to produce those products that are good for food security. For example, maize for food and feed security, but also sugarcane, but also other plantation crops like tea soybean, and others, soybean and others. So those are the few areas that I thought are important for my parting shots.
Thank you very much. Gentlemen, thank you very much for honoring our invite. We really appreciate that. Professor, thank you very much for always honoring our invite. And it's good to have you, Honorable Minister, and hope you can be able to come back when the summit is done to be able to discuss that. I also want to thank the production team for making today possible, both in the control room and the ones that have been on the floor. Thank you for also keeping with us and everyone that sent through a message. But I will end with something around what Professor Latigo said. And we'll end with this quote: dirty water does not stop plants from growing, so do not let negative thinking hinder you. Good morning.
UBC, inspiring Uganda.
Parish Development Model, meno misegese madongo mulukin ma Uganda, ma President Yoweri Museveni owuodho i oro ganario gi piero gario, gatonga malwenyo gi chandi, kod imedo iko ngere matich pa government, tundori dhano ma piny chako gi muluka, otieko dhiro pesa silingi, trillion achiel, thoni aboro abich, risakos makalo Ghana 10,500, to ji milion achiel, Ghana 32 gi 183 tho ka Uganda gi pi jinwang'o pesa madongruok gine. Government ma Uganda foyo wini rojolo chan ma Parish Development Model to wi oro makwanyruok woko inyaka tishiri ishkende mung'ere tek ni okukolera echidanchonka. Onyo igo kokori jopiny medo riwruok i wuoth me makelo wirruok maber ithenge mating'o malo lim kod ikuopa ji. Wach me okelere rin kod Government Citizen Interaction Center, State House.
Enteekateeka ya Parish Development Model eyatongozebwa mu 2022 ng'omukulembeze w'eggwanga Yoweri Kaguta Museveni yagitongoza. Eno eyambyeko nnyo okuggya abantu mu waavu n'okutumbula enkulaakulana y'ebitundu eby'enjawulo okusinziira ku mutendera gw'emiruka. Era ng'enteekateeka eno yakateekebwamu ensimbi za Uganda eziri mu trillion emu n'ensimbi endala ezigwamu, era nga SACCO 1,500 ze zaakaganyulwa mu nteekateeka eno nga bagijjumbidde bawerera ddala akakadde kamu mu emitwalo 3 mu 2083 okwetoola ebitundu by'eggwanga ebyenjawulo. Gavumenti ku lw'ensonga eno yeebaza abantu bonna abataddeyo omwoyo ne muteekesa mu nkola enteekateeka ya Parish Development Model, era ng'eyambyeko okuyitimusa abantu okuva ku nkola ey'okukolerera olubuto lwokka. Kati bannayuganda mwenna mukubirizibwa okwenyigira mu nteekateeka eno n'enteekateeka zonna endala eziba zireeteddwa gavumenti okukulaakulanya abantu baayo. Mwebale nnyo, mwebalire ddala.
Inaingaharenga ya Parish Development Model PDM yasimamisibwawo mu mwiko kw'ebikano 2022 ni President Museveni husolanisa mu butambi ni hulosera hutapusa bibindu bikali mu miruha yayingisibwamo kamapesa silingi trillion sikano sitwera kama 55 kakaabirisibwa mu matuli sako kumukanda mutwera ni bitondo birano kaatapusibwa ku bandu babola ifuma ndwera kimikanda kitaru bikano bibiri sitondo sitwera kama 55 papataru mwinambo. Government ya Uganda khusima khulwekho khwakanira PDM ni khukiyetsa khura khusye khurambira inda yonyene babandu balombebwa khukuyambira mu nekarenga bubaho okutapusibwakho ni ba Government Citizen Interaction Center, State House.
Parish Development Model, Lobu President Yoweri Kaguta Museveni, Itegi Okarla 2022, Anoiti Jiba Korokale Tomoronya, Nesikwa Nako Rice Rigin, Etrilin Edope, Leja Sisa Koilo de Parete Lukumini Tomon, Keda Akwatakan. Anakidona, Itungalwe de Parete, Million Tedope, Imeda Uneto Tomo Parish Development